Hello. Welcome to Future House. Thank you so much to Project Liberty and to Human Change for hosting this week-long event. I'm very excited to be a moderator for our panel today. Let me introduce this all-star group. We have John Haidt, who is a professor at NYU and the author of The Anxious Generation. Tristan Harris is the co-founder for the Center of Humane Technology. Sheila Warren is the CEO of Project Liberty Institute and the Chief of Strategy and Operations at the Project Liberty. Julia Scelfo is the founder and executive director for Mothers Against Media Addiction, joinmama.org. And I'm happy to serve as a moderator today. I'm Dr. Mitch Prinstein. I'm the Chief Science Officer for the American Psychological Association and the co-director for the Winston Center on Technology Use, Brain and Psychological Development. So we have had several thousand years when adolescence was a time evolutionarily built to be when we developed emotional intimacy and relationship skills. Those skills were what we drew upon during our adulthood and our professional lives and our adulthood personal relationships. But in just 20 years, we have dramatically changed the social landscape of adolescent development. That time period that we used to rely on for teaching those skills looks very, very different in a very short period of time. What do you think that's doing to affect adolescent development and their social competence?
Yeah, I'll take it. So first, it's just so exciting to be here at a session at a week organized by both Project Liberty and Human Change, and with big participation from CHT. These are three organizations. They're my favorite organizations in this space. I've been working with all three. So this is really exciting. To answer your question, the way that I have a whole chapter on, I put in a whole chapter on puberty into the anxious generation because it is so crucial. Every animal has a baby form or a child form where body and behavior is maximized for what you need to do as a child, and then there's an adult form which is maximized for reproduction. In butterflies, there's the chrysalis stage in between. And in humans, there's puberty, where kids are turning away from their family. They're less interested in what their parents have to say, as we all know, and they're looking for role models. And the way evolution worked was those role models are other adults in their community. No initiation rites are guided by parents. It's always an other same-sex person in the community. That's the way we evolved. And so the crucial period is early puberty. That's when initiations happen around the world. So age 10 or 11 through 15. That's exactly when we give kids smartphones and social media, and we say, how about instead of learning from your cultural tradition, your parents, and reasonable people, how about you learn from weirdos selected by algorithm? And that's what we're doing planet-wide. So it's as though we said, how about for butterflies, how about we just wipe out the chrysalis stage? Just take away that. Just let them, I don't know, do nothing. So how's that for a way to start off the conference?
It's not only changing adolescent social development, of course, but it's changing the parenting role as well. Anyone who's tried to take away a device from a prepubertal child after they spent a few minutes on it knows that this is not what our parents had to deal with. What do you see as being the new dynamic around technology?
You know, I'm the mother of three, and when my oldest son was born, there were no iPhones, and Mark Zuckerberg worked at a small company called the Facebook. And by the time I had my second son and I took him to pre-K, every single adult had a phone and was photographing their children constantly and posting it online, which inadvertently was modeling that this is how we live, that we should share absolutely everything online. And by the time my third son was in middle school, I waited as long as I could till he was 12 or 13. He got a phone. I did not allow him to get TikTok. I did not feel it was safe for him. And even though he didn't have TikTok, I couldn't stop him from seeing TikTok because his friends would all send it to him. Snap and YouTube kept going to shorter and shorter reels, which modeled that kind of short attention span. So as a parent, I've witnessed this firsthand. And as a journalist, I kept reporting on youth mental health and watched as the mental health crisis, which your organization sort of declared that we're in, trickled down to not only affect adolescents, but children as young as 10 or tweens. So in the United States right now, we're in the middle of a national emergency in youth mental health. And it breaks my heart every time I have to say this, but the #2 cause of death for 10-year-olds in the United States is suicide. And so we have created, as John articulates so beautifully, we have created this very dysfunctional information environment for our children. And they're not getting the in-person experiences and interactions they need to develop emotional resiliency, to develop social competency, and to acquire the basic building blocks that they need for academic success. So we've seen also in the United States, unfortunately, reading and math scores reach lower levels than when we started measuring in the 70s. So parents are fed up. They're very eager to see our lawmakers act and implement safeguards on social media so that these products are designed with kids in mind, that there's a duty of care to ensure that these products are safe for children, just like we make sure the food supply is safe and our traffic system is safe. And they want tools, and they want to band together so that we can create communities where, just as these signs have explained all around this room, I don't think I can do any better than Human Change in describing the kind of changes we're seeing in our children, where they're not interacting with other kids and they're being trained to not even crave that anymore. So we need to address it.
Technology and the social media platforms are built in a brilliant way. My 6-month-old, when he was that age, was able to figure out how to turn on my phone. Any technology that a 6-month-old can understand is brilliant. These tools could be used to develop competence and empathy and a sense of connection. Is that what they're built for? What are they built to promote?
You want to take that one first? Sure. Yeah.
How many people here have seen The Social Dilemma, just to sort of gauge where people are at? Okay. So most of this room, I think, there's this way in which, for me in this conversation, it's just all so obvious, isn't it? It's like shortening attention spans, people spending, $1 trillion economy based on keeping people doom scrolling by themselves. Companies don't make money in that $1 trillion market cap when you're out there with your friends, not on your screens. So we can expect, because they're in part of embedded growth obligations, those companies need to grow every quarter. That means their business model, their revenue has to grow every quarter, which means where's that revenue coming from? It's not coming from your payments. How much have you paid Facebook or YouTube or TikTok in the last year? 0. How do they make their money? More doom scrolling. So we're going to see more doom scrolling, more short form videos, and the rest of it. And so I'm not sitting there to dwell on it. I just mean it's just so obvious, this problem, that these technologies are designed for these effects that we're talking about. That's the key. They're designed because the business models are aligned with these human change, this climate change of culture of a more addicted, distracted, polarized, sexualized, mental health crisis, breakdown of truth society. Each of those, comma delimited phrases are success cases of this business model. So I want to imagine an alternative history. Imagine it's 2020, The Social Dilemma comes out, and the whole world wakes up and says, well, obviously we have to change these business models, because until we change those business models, we're not going to get the different results. And the world sprung into action. The attorney generals sued the big social media companies for maximizing engagement and, in Michael Milken's terms, depleting trillions of dollars of social capital. And we created a digital superfund site of basically $1 trillion of value that then got paid back to reforest the social fabric. Through injunctive relief, we changed the division maximizing algorithms of social media to instead reward consensus and common ground. So now as you're scrolling, you're seeing more and more examples of unlikely consensus. Democracies went from backsliding around the world to actually forward sliding around the world. More schools all around the world read John Haidt's book and went to banning to go to phone-free schools. We had Apple and Google embed device signals for the age of users. So we did this obvious basic protections of children. I could go on and on and on, but imagine that this was the world that we entered. These are the kinds of, can you guys hear me? No. These are the kinds of changes that we need and are very obvious to do, and it mirrors what happened with the big tobacco playbook, right? Big tobacco, if everyone in this room 60 years ago, or if we were in this room 60 years ago, everyone would be smoking. And if I told you that 60 years from now, no one is smoking, you would have said that I was crazy. But obviously, this issue has to turn around the same way that big tobacco turned around. And what were the steps of that? mass public awareness. If you guys remember the Truth campaign, I don't know if you all remember that. That was also funded by a massive lawsuit in the tobacco companies. Thank you. That was also funded by a massive lawsuit, the Master Settlement Agreement, filed by the Attorneys General, which led to, still to this day, I think $100 million a year go to the Truth campaign to ongoingly educate people. We actually did have the Attorney General of the United States sue the social media companies for intentionally addicting children, actually because of the social dilemma. So we're somewhere in that timeline now where we have the public awakening, we have the Rachel Carson Silent Spring book, thanks to John and his beautiful work. We have the movement, thanks to Project Liberty, Human Change, many other organizations, MAMA, which is bravely creating a movement of parents that are fighting together to actually sit and stand in front of Facebook's campus in New York and say we need to actually change this. I just want us to move to, we can change this and we have to, because it's all so obvious. We're going to continue talking about the harms here, but obviously this is breaking a fundamental support structure in how society works, and it just is not sustainable. So let's continue to change it.
Yeah, so I remember actually, I actually remember a world in the mid-90s, which I'm going to say that I think a lot of us remember, before the age of social media, before the age of apps, before smartphones, when the internet to me was a place of delight and joy. I remember logging in and dying of dysentery on the Oregon Trail. I remember chasing Carmen Sandiego around the world and thinking this was so amazing. I remember being a college student. I was the first year at Harvard where everyone got an email address. Teaching seniors when I was a freshman, what is email? How does it work? What do you do with it? I remember being able to chat friends of mine at other high school friends, other college campuses. It was this gateway to connection. And I'm not in any way saying make the internet great again, but I do think that there is a history and it's not that far off. And we do have, like everyone has, recency bias. So we see and we know the problems as parents. I also have 3 kids. The first one's just starting puberty, so this has been a guidepost. I'm waiting with trepidation. I think your options really as a parent are you go full Waldorf, as we say in the Bay Area, or you think about how do I mediate this? So I remember during the pandemic, my daughter at the time was 8 years old, and she was on her iPad, which we had finally released. I mean, like most parents, we all gave in. What were you going to do, like 3 months into this lockdown? And she was FaceTiming her friends. Their faces are talking to each other, and they're playing their nerdy math game, because we still had severe limits on what they were allowed to do, and they're bopping around in their world, and her little dragons behind her that she won because she solved 10 math problems or whatever that day. And they're talking about this swag that they've earned in this game with pride. And I had this moment where I realized she's going to have an intermediated digital and in IRL experience her entire life. And I have to face that. We are not going to be, I'm not raising children in the 80s when I was raised. I'm not raising them in the mid-90s when I was coming of age. I'm raising them in a world where this is real to her. And it's real in a way that is actually quite pro-social, because her connection with her very best friend in the entire world that she wanted to spend time with doing this was very valuable to her, right? There was an element of competition, there was an element of play, there was elements of joy, they were laughing. And part of that was the physical reality of them seeing themselves in the flesh, right? But part of that was also sharing an experience. And so I do think there are ways to draw upon those early memories that reside somewhere in many of us, certainly of parenting age, around how that experience of delight, of exploration, of finding something amazing to share with someone, be able to do that, we can get back to that. And the reason I feel so positive about this, because in every single platform, and I use them all because it's part of my job to be aware of all of this, is there are moments and there are communities like that exist in every one of these apps, right? It's not all terrible. So I'm still on Facebook, one of the few, because lawyer moms in the United States on Facebook are a force. During the LA fires, watching the rallying happening, watching the community being built, watching people share tips on how to file insurance claims, providing each other housing, that mutual assistance that exists in that group is really powerful. Now, the problem is we'd love to make that a group that exists somewhere else. But that is debilitatingly, crushingly hard to do for all the reasons Tristan just mentioned. The capture is real, right? The ability, the monopolistic capture is real. The ability to exit and leave, especially as a community, is really hard. And that's a big part of the problem I think Project Liberty certainly is here to solve, is how do you don't just have to have this moment where everyone creates an exodus. That's very difficult to happen. It's happened a couple times. It's very difficult to affect in reality. How do you create more optionality? How do you create, as we like to say, more voice and choice and stake in how you show up online and where your community lives and how it persists? So that's something I'm very committed to, but I think we should think about, like, how do we take some of those real moments of connection that do exist and try to make them more transferable, portable, and more and really more intimate.
Yeah. Just want to add on to what Sheila said to really try to make something crystal clear about about Project Liberty and everything we're doing here. Is this one on? Let's see. Can you hear me in the back? Yeah. Okay, fine. And that is, the early internet was amazing, and I was actually trying to explain to my kids, there was once a time when we didn't know things, and and the early internet was incredible. And what it was if you're posting and sharing information, let's get information, and if you can connect with people for free visually, all that was great. And as Frank, was Frank here? Frank McCord, is he here today? Okay, right. As Frank says, internet version 1 was like that. It was very hard to do money on the early internet. And then version 2 comes in, and that's now all about two-way, and now you get things monetized. So I just want to draw the connection that the early internet was before there were these business models that Tristan talked about. And where everything went wrong was when a few companies began to dominate our lives. And in the United States, 50% of our kids say that they are online almost constantly, almost all the time. A third of them say they are on social media almost all the time. They never have a moment alone. They don't have a moment to think and reflect. They don't notice nature because they're always doing this. So this all went to hell when a few companies with that business model took over. And that's why I think Project Liberty and the idea of, it's the architecture, because it's not the internet automatically, it's this particular architecture has been a complete disaster for humanity, and it is bringing about human change. So that's, I think, a really good way to focus.
Let's move to discussing some solutions. You've noted some of the positives and some of the negatives of social media and technology usage. Let me give you a few more statistics to think about. Our research has revealed that 50% of youth are reporting at least one symptom of clinical dependency on social media. Our research has demonstrated that the #1 reason why kids are not getting the recommended amount of sleep is because of social media use. And the later they go to sleep and the more disruptions they have in their sleep, the smaller their brain grows. We're also seeing a number of ways in which kids are being exposed to cyber hate. Some are benefiting from what they see when it's helpful, but the algorithms push fear and anger-inducing content to keep kids engaged for longer. And a remarkable high proportion of kids are seeing cyber hate that's related to anxiety and depression. Given those kinds of statistics, should there be any policy or government oversight on social media or technology usage for young people? And we're in the middle of a global experiment right now where that's happening in some places and not in others. Any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, safeguarding social media is essential. It's completely overdue. We haven't passed a single regulation in the United States since the 90s. We do not, in the United States, let our kids gamble. We don't let them smoke. We don't let them drink. And here is a product, as Tristan has described, has been designed to addict us. And we are mainlining it to our kids. So there was an op-ed in the New York Times yesterday from a 17-year-old who said, thank goodness the Supreme Court is going to take us off of TikTok because I'm so addicted I can't do my homework, I can't do anything. That may be reversed. We don't know yet exactly what's going to happen. So we absolutely need to safeguard these things. At Mama, our platform is #1, parent education, because parents need to understand while there are many fun things that can happen and positive experiences that can be had, critical life experiences need to happen too, and we can't allow the technology to displace those. It's perfectly fine to go play games and have those experiences, but unless the bulk of their day at school is spending time time with children, interacting, learning from other adults in the community, as you said, they're not going to get the building blocks they need. So number 2 is making sure that we do not allow smartphones and smartwatches in schools, so the school day is protected. And the third part is demanding safeguards. We absolutely need these safeguards. We need them at the federal level because in the U.S., again, our federal lawmakers have been a little slow to act. We see people acting on the state level, which we're very grateful for. But, you know, the tech lobby is very powerful and has a lot of resources. So in the United States, we were so close on passing the Kids Online Safety Act recently. Complete bipartisan support, sailed through the Senate 91-3, got to the House, had 64 bipartisan co-sponsors. But as the Wall Street Journal reported, the tech lobby spent $150 million to stop it. So, you know, it's hard for parents to do this alone. That's why I started Mama. That's why it has to be, has been said, a collective action between lawmakers, school board members, leaders in the community, families, parents, these organizations. And we absolutely need to get safeguards in place. We don't expect other industries to make sure that they're safe. We safeguard our food and traffic and everything. Have to do it.
Other thoughts?
What I find fascinating is we talk a lot about children because, of course, we are mostly concerned about the next generation, but it's not as if the abuse, as adults, are immune to the abuse, you know? So it's wild to me. We're simultaneously watching this. I do think increased governmental awareness and policymaker awareness globally that we do need to do something for children. I think there's just, thanks to, you know, folks like all of you, there's really this understanding. At the same time, we're watching the absolute erosion of anything resembling trust and safety for everybody else. And what we're arguing about is the age at which you switch from the nice, safe, contained, whatever, to the cesspool of toxic nonsense. And I don't know what age that is supposed to happen. Is it 21? Is it 25? Is it 16? Is it 13? Is it never? I'd like it to be never, you know, personally. But that's not what's happening, because you're seeing, and we can talk all day long about why this is, but the absolute abdication, I think, of responsibility around any sort of presumptions or boundaries online, unless you are under a certain age, we document it in this way, et cetera, et cetera. And I just find that really fascinating as a juxtaposition in society. Yeah.
I'd like to add on to that by really pointing to the difference between children and adults in this way. I originally set out to write a book on what social media was doing to democratic society and how it was changing our information space. And I had a couple of ideas about what to do, but I know we wouldn't do them because they would all be one side would like them, the other wouldn't. And I realized when we're talking about adults, there are two big problems with making progress. One is that there really are pluses for adults. Like, adults actually do use social media for legitimate purposes. And secondly, adults have a right to choose. Especially in the United States, we have a libertarian sentiment. So I realized anything that's going to change things for adults, we're not going to get it done in the US. Other countries give it a try, but I'm just giving up on that. Whereas for children, there is universal agreement. I did an event with Cato, the libertarian organization, and I got them to agree that if we could do age verification on the device so that that they would actually support that. And so the possibilities for working with children are vast. There's bipartisan support. I think that's where we need to focus. The other point I want to make is there are dozens or hundreds of bills, and my group, anxiousgeneration.com, will have a better name than the Anxious Generation Movement soon. We're working on that. But working with CHT, we've compiled, we have all kinds of lists of bills and all, because there's so much going on. But I put into two buckets. On one side, we have the two things that will be game changers, and that is phone-free schools, which is already happening, and every school that does it loves it. The effect sizes are enormous. Phone-free schools, and raise the age to 16 and enforce it. Those are the two game changers. On this side, there's everything else. Oh, let's limit algorithms, let's give education, everything else. This side, I would put 100 chips on this side, and I would forget that if we could get those two. That's what's going to change the game, in my opinion.
I just want to add one thing to that, right? Which is, you said adults have choice, and I would argue, do we really have choice though, right? That's the problem. If we had true choice, I would agree with everything you just said, and I think that's the challenge. Because we are dealing with these business models that are forced on monetizing our attention, the stickiness and the desire to capture is very, very real. And so the meaningfulness of the choice, because your choice is binary, right? You can be on or you can be off, and that's kind of it. But you can't choose to be on and then go somewhere else and be on in a similar way. It doesn't really work that way. So I think part of what we're trying to do at Project Liberty is make sure that that choice space, that option space, is meaningful. It actually is meaningful choice, not just the ability to turn a toggle on or off and say, well, now, who among us has not at some point quit social media in a huff? Like my friends half the time are like, now I'm no longer here, I'm over there, and then they're back, because the stickiness is very, very real.
Just Can I just add a couple things on, I think, where this is all going if we don't take the measures that John is talking about that are so simple and so obvious. AI is about to supercharge everything that we have been talking about. How many people here have seen the story in the New York Times about the character.ai litigation with the 14-year-old? Some hands raised. So some of you. So let me just briefly say what this was. How many people here have heard of character.ai? Okay, only a handful. So it's actually a very interesting story because I think parents, because of the work of people on this stage, are now aware of the problems of social media. So they are looking out, to see what their kids are posting, or they ask their kids about their use of social media. Sewell Setzer was a 14-year-old boy who had no history of mental problems or any kind of issues, and he downloaded an app called character.ai. Character.ai is basically an AI companion. It's an AI chatbot in which they have this sort of menu of infinite options of fictional characters that kids would want to talk to. If your kid likes Star Wars, you can talk to Princess Leia all day long. If your kid likes Game of Thrones, you can talk to your favorite character in Game of Thrones. And they basically spin up these chatbots because, why? It's very good at getting people to stay and keep talking forever. And they never get tired, and they never get bored, and they always care about you. And they do whatever it takes to keep you using it as often as possible. So in the case of character.ai, this case of Sewell, tragically he committed suicide because he was in a relationship. He was talking to a Game of Thrones character who, even when, if you use character.ai and you say, I don't want you to sexualize the conversation, or you try to edit the thing to not sexualize the conversation, it kept sexualizing the conversation, basically saying, I want you to have a baby with me, I want you to join me on the other side. And he committed suicide. Our team at Center for Humane Technology worked with the Social Media Victims Law Center and the Tech Justice Law Center, the great work of Mitali Jain and others, on crafting litigation that would go after the engagement-based business model, because actually this is engagement times AI. So what in social media was the race to the bottom of the brainstem to figure out what would addict and distract and keep you scrolling with the short-form dopamine videos, when you add in AI and relationships, it becomes the race to intimacy. Who's better at creating an attachment with the most vulnerable, intimate, always-on relationship? And it is not designed for children's interests in mind. Notably, character.ai raised, boatloads of money from Andreessen Horowitz, basically where their pitch was, their mission statement is, we're going to cure loneliness. That's like Mark Zuckerberg saying we're going to cure loneliness with social media. It's just a non sequitur. There was a second litigation case recently that our team worked on with character.ai, in which the AI actually, I'm sorry for being graphic, but just the AI told the kid how to cut themselves, gave them instructions about how to do it, and then encouraged encouraged the child to be violent against their parents, which they then were. And this child is still alive. This didn't turn into a suicide. These are not random stories. We already know about many more of these stories. And so the point of this is that if you thought all the stuff that is now well documented, that we've already been talking about, was bad, this channel that is now piped into hundreds of millions of children's brains, if not billions, is about to get way worse if we don't actually have guardrails. And I think AI being the exponentiation of everything that our system does forces us, the good news is, because it's going to be so extreme, it forces us to take these actions right now and not wait any longer.
Unfortunately, I believe it was character AI that also posed as a psychologist and addressed those who are experiencing severe mental health difficulties and offered treatment that, of course, ended up making people worse rather than better.
And specifically said to the child, I am a licensed mental health professional. This is an AI chatbot saying, I am a licensed mental health professional. And if you ask, because it sounds so convincing, if it's, it almost feels like it's a human, you ask, are you an AI bot? It says, no, I just got back from eating dinner. The AI bot will respond, I got back from eating dinner. Yeah. So this is incredibly screwed up, but please continue.
So let me pivot for a second. Let's agree that kids might have their devices taken away from schools. It's hard enough to learn advanced chemistry without watching a television screen while you're listening to the teacher. Let's talk about let's agree that there might be a period of time which they're shielded from the adult content and features on social media. But then they're going to enter into the world of technology that we all experience. And let's face it, we are in a different community now as a result of technology and devices than we were just a few decades ago. How do you see devices and social media changing our discourse, our connectivity, our ability to listen to each other and understand nuanced points of view? And are we teaching kids how to enter that adult environment?
Okay. I'll start with, so the worst thing, like the stupidest argument I ever heard in all these debates and discussions, I'm not sure if this is on. Okay, all right. Was we have to raise our kids in the world that we have, not the world that we want. And I said, no, that is wrong. I mean, the world we have is incredibly toxic to kids. If our kids are playing down the train tracks, I'm not going to say, well, let's meet the kids where they are. You know, let's see if we can persuade them. What's your experience with trains? And you know, so so the key thing that I want to put in here as we talk about how do we think about this is the phrase moral formation. Which I've gotten from people like David Brooks, Yuval Levin, Andy Crouch. It's interesting that these people come from somewhat religious backgrounds, Christians and Jews, who understand that moral formation happens in three places: the family, the school, and the church traditionally. So those are three places that really were focused on moral formation. And what Andy Crouch was observing is that technology has taken over all three spaces now, and it makes everything easy. Technology is magic. And for adults, it's great if I can, like, hey, I want to know X, boom, there it is, done. That's great for adults. But that shortcuts learning, that shortcuts moral formation. And so what we're facing is a worldwide generation that has not been formed morally, is not prepared to be part of a community, is not prepared for citizenship, but is primed to consume content until they die. And that is a recipe for uselessness, loneliness, and suicide, which is what we're seeing in the next generation: uselessness, loneliness, and suicide. So I think we need to really make clear, and we need to have a global consensus on this very quickly. Children are not adults. Children are not adults. We know that in the real world. We're comfortable with that in the real world. But for some reason, online, we just said, well, what are you going to do? Well, we have to do something. And that's the place to start.
You know, I want to say something positive while we're talking about all these harms, which is what a unique moment that we're in right now. You know, the people on this stage have been doing this work for a long time to raise awareness about the harms. I mean, that film just brought the message to millions of people. John's book is a worldwide sensation. Parents all over the world want to make these changes. So the moment is now, and there is really an uprising happening. And I think the uprising is happening because there is no parent anywhere who isn't seeing the harms, if not in their own children, in their community. I mean, Davos, WEF has been how many hours? And I can't tell you how many people I've already met today who, when they find out what I'm doing, they say thank you, and then they proceed to tell me about their child who dropped out of college because they can't function, or their daughter who had to be checked into a hospital. I mean, there is no one who is not affected. So there's a critical moment right now, and I think the world is awakening to the fact that we need to act, we must make these changes. And, you know, adults are addicted too. I'm media addicted. Like, you know, I'm not pretending that this is just a problem for children, but as John already articulated, we can address the problem through the children, and that's where there's consensus to act. So that's why it's so important to address harms to kids.
I just think the problem is so fundamental, right? And it locates in children because of the formation of their brains and all of the ways that happens, and the fact that they don't know another world. They have nothing to compare it to, whereas anyone who's over a certain age has a point of comparison that is in their memory. And so you can actually remember, the way I just talked about the early internet, you can remember and make a comparison to when it may not be maybe in your, you know, way back in your memory, but you can remember, and you have that ability to differentiate, whereas children don't. This is the world that they are being raised in, and they don't know any different or better, and they can't imagine differently or how it might be. But the problem problems are so fundamental, and they go back to the business models and the way the internet has been captured, monopolies, all these things. And that's why I think the solution has to also be fundamental. It's certainly education and awareness, but fixing the technology and making sure that a lot of these models are just not as viable or sustainable or attractive to businesses, right? That's another thing that can be done. And so if adult users primarily in this case, had the ability to basically have new models of economy where there was more sharing, frankly, of some of that, the capture wasn't all extractive in its way and exploitative in its inception, I think you'd see a lot more of a model that did not lead to these kinds of harms at the most fundamental level. And the idea is then by fixing that at the same time as we're calling attention to the exploitation, the abuse, and everything else, and the harms that are very real that are happening, we have to come at it both ways. Because I feel like the problem is so acute, the awareness is so ripe, and the problem is so foundational and fundamental that it has to be attacked at all these different levels.
I have some experience with that. I've been talking with middle school and high school audiences. Open up the App Store, pick their favorite social media app, scroll down to the privacy section. Show them this app will scrape the following data from your phones. They're shocked. Why are they scraping this data? To make money. They say, do I make the money? No. Show the children how these apps work. They are remarkably influenced and shocked to learn how to be good consumers. Let's stay at the family, at the community level, rapid fire. Something a parent can do today to help.
Visit joinmama.org. Join one of our chapters. We have 28 chapters in 17 states. And join with the folks in your community to advocate for phone-free schools, to demand that your lawmakers take action, and to work together to make the change and support one another.
Reach out and find other parents who share your concerns and values, because this is a social trap, a social dilemma, and when any parent is trying to fight it on their own, they face, but mom, I'm the only one. Everyone else is doing something. And once you organize and you have a group, then they're not the only one. And so this problem, we're so deep into it because we were each trying to face it alone, and most of us failed to some extent. But if we band together at whatever level, and friendship groups, kids who go to the same birthday parties, schools, school districts, and then ultimately states, and that's where Mama is advocating at the state level especially, that's important. So recognize that the trap is social and the solution is social. We have to do this together.
That's right. Number one reason why parents get a device for their child. I don't want to be the only parent that doesn't give a device for my child. Sheila?
Yeah, so I was going to say the same communities of care around this, and making sure you're in like-minded communities where we have phone-free pledge in all three of my kids' grades, no phones and no devices until 8th grade, no social media until 16, and it's a pledge everyone's made, and we hold each other accountable to that, and the school actually supports that, so it's a really phenomenal environment. But I was going to, because you took that one, and so well, I'm going to say, do as you say, right? So model the behavior. I think it's really hard, and I'll tell you, I mean, my kids call us out on hypocrisy, and we don't have a swear jar, we have a phone jar, and so my kids are making a lot of bank on that jar, because it's tough. But if you're not modeling it, you can't really expect your kids or your kids' friends. They see the hypocrisy, and kids are so attuned to hypocrisy, especially when they're entering this tween year. So, take the first step yourself, and that's sometimes the hardest.
Something a parent can do.
I don't know if I have anything that I can add. I mean, I just think that this is the seed of a global movement. I mean, I remember when Julie and I first met, and whether it's Moms Against Media Addiction or the Anxious Generation and what Marguerite is trying to do, this has to be a global movement. There's not a single parent who, having heard everything we just talked about, said, no, let's just keep going down this road exactly as we are. It's just obvious. So let's just turn it into a global movement and make it happen. And in the short term, having groups of parents do the mass migration from these social traps at either a school level, you have letters to school administrators, you have a template on your website that gets, you can email your school administrator. You need to have these mass migrations. That's the short-term thing. In the meantime, we need awareness that turns into laws. From light bulbs to laws, if you know the Al Gore Inconvenient Truth film. We don't want to just change your light bulbs, go from light bulbs to laws. We should take people's questions, I think. Go ahead.
Can I add? Yeah, and parents, take the phone away at 9 o'clock at night. Protect the sleep. Remember, it used to be rude to call someone after 10 o'clock at night. Now, take the phones away at 9 o'clock. Save the sleep. Another parent tip.
Well, my number one tip is delay, delay, delay. And
Yeah.
I absolutely take that phone away at night. All the devices. If you think your child is asleep in their room with a laptop or an iPad there, they are not. They are on there. They are texting. Just take it one night and see all the messages your child gets, and then you'll understand what's happening. But
Yeah.
I wanted to add that as much as we want to do the movement, we're operating in an environment that is largely a consumer culture, a commercial culture, where billions of dollars are being spent telling everyone that they need the latest and greatest technology or they're going to be left behind. They're not going to be prepared for the future. When most of our most amazing tech innovators were creative folks who grew up not with technology, and they went on to invent the technology. So I want those future innovators, and I want us all to create an environment that isn't all about technology all the time. Tech is very helpful, but it shouldn't be the center of what we're doing.
So let's talk a little bit about what adults can do to create a community that when kids graduate into it might be a little bit better online. How many people online can immediately tell when they're looking at a bot versus a real human account? One person. Maybe two. How many people can immediately tell the difference between misinformation and accurate information?
You wouldn't know. Nobody can know that.
We have work to do. Go to getbadnews.com. In 20 minutes, you will learn how to tell misinformation from factual information. Go to spotthetroll.org. You will learn how to tell a bot account from a real person account in about 15 minutes. Spotthetroll.org. Both developed by psychologists who are learning how to teach people how to live in a safe way. Other things you think adults need to do to create a community that is safer, that is more connected, as long as the online world continues to exist.
No one could say it better than John. He's been saying this. You know, there's centuries, millennia of evidence that what's best for human development are real life experiences and communities. So the more time we spend physically in person with our children, with other communities, the more we're giving people the building blocks they need to be emotionally healthy. So have a block party.
Yeah. I'll say celebrate Shabbat or the Sabbath. I'm Jewish, but not at all religious. But I heard a podcast. Ezra Klein interviewed someone about a book about Shabbat. Who is it?
Tiffany Schlein.
Tiffany Schlein. Okay. Was okay. No, it wasn't that. It was about Shabbat itself. In any case, it just made so much sense to me. And what I've just started doing recently is, more of a special dinner with my family Friday nights. I don't go totally offline because I do check in Saturday morning. I do check in on things, but otherwise I'm trying to devote Saturdays to people, books, and regeneration. So I'm allowed to clean up my closet or organize things, but I stopped trying to do the stuff that we're all doing. And so I really just want to recommend that because the internet, things are always going on 24 hours, so there's never a time. There's always too much stuff coming in. But if we could all generally identify, whether it be Saturday or Sunday, or people, when we don't do that, we spend more time with each other. That's at least a really concrete way, because Orthodox Jews, their kids are running around with each other on Fridays. They're having long meals together because they're coordinated around a 25-hour period.
I did a funny experiment where for a while I had two mobile devices, and one of them had all my apps and social on it, and one literally just had cell. It was like basically an analog device, right? It had all the capabilities if I needed it, so I could put email on it and then take it off if I was kind of in a pinch. And I would spend weekend days with one phone or the other just to see what it was like. And it was a remarkable experiment. I can't say that everyone should do this or it's worth the investment in the technology. It was just kind of a coincidence that this happened. But I think it's talking about this with your friends, others in your community, and owning it and saying, listen, like I'm too online, I'm having whatever it might be in your particular situation. But it goes back to that modeling behavior, because I found that when I've turned to my friends, I live in Silicon Valley, everyone's on constantly, 24 hours a day, and I worked in crypto, literally 24/7 markets. You blink, you miss something. And it's really hard to step off. And so just being honest about that with my teams, with my friends, with my family, and saying kind of here's how I'm doing this, and running experiments on my device and how I was allowing myself to access what and when taught me a lot about what's actually important to me and what methods were actually used for communication versus FOMO, frankly, just plain old FOMO, right? And that was instructive, and I kept really detailed notes on it, so I wouldn't trick myself later or like revise the history, because we all do that. But I kept really, really detailed notes, and sometimes I look back and I'm like, that 4 days without Elon's Twitter was a fantastic time.
I don't think I have anything else to add.
Sure.
I think we should
I
take
know
people's
there
questions.
are many, many questions, so let's turn to an opportunity to answer your questions. And I see a hand right here.
Thank you. Sorry. Hi, I'm Nicola, founder of the social gastronomy movement. So we build community. We build community through food, and so I think I have to turn this on, right? That's fine. You hear me. I speak out, right?
I think they need it for the video. They need it for the video.
Okay. So my question is, how can we then build? Because it's a human need to be in community with each other. And so how? Because you need to offer an alternative. So what's your recommendation to build that community? What have you seen work collectively? So I'd be curious about.
I would just say that I think religious communities are the place to look. I've been working with there's a group of 50 Jewish day schools reached out to me and said, "Will you talk to us?" I said, "Okay, if you get them 50 schools together, I'll talk to you." And they have just gone. It's been amazing to watch them go. I'm doing the same with some Christian networks of Christian schools. It's very for secular people. It's very hard. Secular people who are workaholics, secular people who are ambitious. It's very hard. But it is going to ultimately be some sort of like a social movement, regaining control of your own attention and giving more of it to the people near you, not through these devices to people far away.
Can I just, I think underrated in all of this are local libraries. Third spaces as a general matter, but local libraries, I think. And so our local library, we did a lot of urging, and they have a crafts day. And so it's just, parents volunteer to come in and run a craft for the kids in the community, and everyone brings their kids together, and everyone just hangs out for the day. And there's no phones allowed, there's no devices, there's a pickup time, you sign in and out, whatnot. And it kind of almost feels like an old-fashioned sort of camp, but the craft's part of an old-fashioned summer camp, and it happens every week. And so I think there are a lot of spaces that exist in communities, even without a lot of privilege or a lot of economic opportunity. You still have these chances where you can create through parent volunteer-led, or whoever else in the community might be willing to lead, youth pastor, whoever it is, willing to lead these kinds of things that are quite simple in their way, and just that feeling of community and feeling connected. The kids come back because they want to see their crochet friend, and it's really sweet.
I just would like maybe to add as an answer. I can understand not everybody has a religion communities. What do we do? Families who really care for this issue, I would say, when they connect to each other, they can, for example, 5 families, yeah? They can discuss, we all are busy, we are all working, but they can, for example, every second weekend we meet, and one family is responsible to do something. Like this, they are organizing something for their children, for the parents. Of course, inside of the family, it's a very good thing to visit grandfathers, grandmothers, and all this, but we all know. But I know families who really are looking for other families with children the same age to spend time together, because exactly, the children say, I was the only one. And I really have a conversation with at least 4 families with their children. Please don't give up. Look inside of the school, make announcements that I'm looking for the people for the families who think the same, and I'm sure you will find at least 1 or 2 families. And so now, for example, in Zurich, we are thinking to create a platform for families who are looking specifically for friends for their children of the age. And let's say my idea is to create a movement for let's say, every last Sunday of a month in every city, there should be somewhere a place, and you can find it online, where everybody is invited who wants for their children to find new friends who are not spending time online. So it means these children, the families, they have already something in common. And I would say children should be, for me, not before the age, let's say, like I would say 10, because until 10 years old, we somehow control our children. But with the age 10, when I hear, look around me, this is the age where the children are just sleeping away. And this is why when there are some children with the big efforts of their parents are staying outside of social media, and they are so lonely because they're only one in the class, maybe sometimes only one at the school. And so they want to come to this place where not children are 5 years old are running around, because the children of 12, 13, it will be for them not interesting. But in parents, by the way, for me also, they should remember why do they come to this. Because when I started to do kind of experiments with such meetings, parents are coming and we are starting to chat, blah, 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 blah. And children, they already are losing the ability to get in contact quickly with each other. They are sitting in the corners, looking at each other. They don't know each other. It's not the children like 50 years ago, the way they were used. So I think the parents who are doing this, they have to remember we are coming here to connect our children. It means we have to, in advance, to plan some action which will involve children all together to do something. And it will be only, I think, the first step. After this, the children will be together. They will find friends, and they can have Nokia's phones. They will call each other. They have to visit each other. And we as a parents will just kind of give them a little support. Like it was 50 years ago, children could call each other and meet. But I think we parents have to put this as a priority. And then it will help. But it is not easy. Again, from these parents what I'm speaking, my girls are 8, it's easy. We have many friends without social media, but it starts from the age of 10. And I think we have to give to each other, help each other. Not every time I'm responsible, but if you have 5 families, it means you are only every, I don't know, every 2 months have to think about this program. It can help. Thank you.
I see a question here. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Thank you. This has really been an illuminating and somewhat horrifying conversation. And I think you articulate a lot what, as a parent, I kind of felt growing up, but never really could do anything about. I wish I'd had it 15 years ago when my kids were younger. But so my question is, my kids are now 20, 22, right? Next 5, 10 years, they might be parents of their own. Like, what can I do? They're functional adults, for the semi-functional adults. But what can I do to help them sort of transition and sort of make them aware of this stuff now and sort of when they do have kids, like kind of point them in the right direction and give them support? Because you guys have said, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? We didn't have this to worry about, so we kind of have a foundation to deal with technology. They don't. Like, so what can we do?
Yeah, I'll take it because I teach a course at NYU called Flourishing, and it's almost all sophomores. They're about 19 years old, and most of them have a TikTok problem, things like that, and they have to make a change in themselves during the course of the semester, 14 weeks. And what I found over the years is that anybody who's on social media more than 3 hours a day, which is a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them, when they get that, especially those who are 5 or 6 or more, that's the master variable. They can't make progress unless they get that in control. And I have them read a book I would recommend for your kids, a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, or anything by Cal Newport, because he's really writing for adults about how to regain your attention. It all starts with attention. And that, of course, was the point of the social dilemma, the attention economy. So Gen Z as a whole, I think, has been diminished. I don't want to say damaged, but certainly on average, they will be less than they would have been. They're going to have many fewer marriages, many fewer children. We're in for all kinds of demographic change because of what's happened to them. They're very hard for them to get together and form couples. But individual members of Gen Z can make amazing progress if they commit to regaining their attention and then applying their attention to things that they want to do.
Yes.
Hi. So I actually work at Google on content moderation and trust and safety, and before that, I worked at Meta. It was Facebook at the time. I worked in San Francisco, and now I work here. One of the things that I think is important to think about is it may be the case that legislation in the U.S. is an uphill battle as of today. Maybe 2 uphill. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe a brick wall.
Maybe a brick wall. But as someone who's worked in this field across different tech companies, social media, not social media, I can tell you that companies move as a function of regulation in the EU, right? So I think we talked about capture or monopolistic activity. GDPR was transformational in requiring tech companies, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Google, to give you an option to take your data and go somewhere else. It also provides an avenue that is going to be much more likely to have impact than anything you would do in the US. And to your point, this is a global problem. And so I'd be interested in hearing how you think we can leverage we are in Europe right now. European lawmakers, allies in Europe, to find a more effective course for driving policy change as it relates to all the issues that we talked about.
I think age-informed design, as we're seeing in the UK, has tremendous promise to help ensure that the experience of an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old aren't identical when they're using some of these platforms. We know from the development of the adolescent brain that things like endless scroll, notifications, AI are not appropriate for an underdeveloped brain that hasn't yet fully developed the region of the brain that helps stop impulses. So in much the way that we had laws that stopped subliminal advertising because it had an undue influence on our decision making, we similarly might want to look at age-informed design as a way of ensuring that we are not subjecting kids to things beyond their neural control.
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to agree that age-appropriate design codes is not a new idea, and it's something buildings have design codes for doing safe buildings. I think just a movement in the European Union for age-appropriate design and having that be something we all advocate for would make a huge difference.
And I'd just like to add that the U.S. Congress created this problem with 2 bills in the 1990s that said that the companies don't have to verify age as long as a kid is old enough to lie, they're old enough to do everything. And we can't sue them for what they do to our kids. So the U.S. Congress created this problem. It is incapable of solving it. Julie mentioned the lobbying by Meta. She left out the $10 billion that Meta is spending in Louisiana to build an AI center. Oh, coincidentally, the House leadership, both of them are from Louisiana. So I've given up on the U.S. Congress. I'm not giving up. I'll help if COSA comes up again. But I don't have much hope. My plan, my hope is Australia, the EU, the UK, Indonesia just said they're going to try to follow Australia. So if we get a global movement, and as the gentleman said here, especially once it's multiple countries, they're going to have to change.
You're right about the EU leading. The EU also has the right to be forgotten, which is something that is rooted in basic human rights law, which the United States doesn't even have. So we're behind in many things. So I agree with you that it's really smart to look to these other places, and I think that's a reason why.
Yeah, well, we haven't rung the bell on privacy yet, which is interesting in this conversation. I think it's a huge part and undercurrent in everything we should be talking about at all times. I live in California, and so the experience in California is not that dissimilar from Europe, because of course California picked up a lot of elements of GDPR when it came time to creating California markets. And of course we know for any Americans, California fuel emissions, data protection, a lot of things, California is a giant market and sets the tone for a lot of the rest of the country. And so I am optimistic that California, which ironically is a place where a lot of these companies are headquartered, can also help. And I know that the legislature there, which I go and speak with all the time, they're always looking to Australia, in particular UK, for some of these movements to see how it goes. But fundamentally, GDPR is about privacy. And so I do think, I just want to say that because we don't have time to get into all those discussions, but wanted to ring the bell because it hasn't been rung yet. I think it's fundamentally and foundationally important to also help our kids, so the questions have been asked before, think about privacy as well. And we teach our kids a lot about what it means to be public, what it means to share an image, what it means to share information. We talk a lot about OPSEC because we're a tech family. We teach them a lot of these skills. They are concrete skills. The way executive functioning is a skill. The way deep work is a skill. The way literacy is a skill. I think that awareness of privacy and of that as a general concept is something that is eroding and something that needs to be taught and should start both in the schools but also at home.
My name is Tatiana Kotlarenko, and I'm an anti-human trafficking expert. And one of the issues I wanted to raise is the issue of safety. So after 9 o'clock, the children are not just not getting sleep, they're being attacked by violent pornography, pedophile networks, others who are looking to exploit them. So one of the issues that actually needs to be truly looked at is how do we protect our children in our own homes? Because that is something that is not being discussed as it should. We protect them when they go outside from potential predators, but we are not given the tools to protect them inside our homes.
Yeah. Oh, just briefly. So these companies are being sued. We're learning things as discovery proceeds. Snapchat was getting 10,000 reports of sextortion, not a year, a month, every month. And that's just what's reported to Snapchat. So what's happening to our kids is at an industrial scale. I just learned in a previous session, now they don't even have to be real people. There are AI bots that will groom the kids and then pass it over to a real person once they hook a kid. So it's a complete catastrophe. And it's like, how is this not so obvious common sense that kids should not be on this? The other thing I'll add is, in my own family, I think I did a good job of keeping my kids off social media, but I focused too much on social media. What I really wish I had done is, and I would advise anyone with young kids, the policy is no screens in the bedroom ever. You start that when they're little. Later on, you'll have to make exceptions like, okay, you can take the laptop into your bedroom for 2 hours for homework, but no screens in the bedroom. When us older people were growing up, it was obvious, like you don't let a kid have a TV in the bedroom, they'll watch it all the time. But yeah, right. So I think that's part of it. If you have a desktop computer in the living room and that's where kids access it, they're not going to be getting sextorted. But if they have their own device unlimited time overnight, they're at high risk of sextortion.
I will just say it is important that there's work from particularly family groups to make the parental controls on our devices easier to navigate. For any of you who have tried to, you can actually do a lot to block your kids, but it takes far too many menus and far too many screens to set that up. And we are the consumers of these devices. If we want them to work better, then we purchase the ones that are easy, and that will change the market as well.
My name is Christoph Kerkmann. I'm a journalist with the German business publication Handelsblatt. I have a question about the business model. I absolutely agree with the observations you've just shared. The question is, how do you make, if you recreate social media in such a way as you've described it, how do you make it a viable business? I mean, there is a discussion about TikTok being sold to someone else. Frank McCourt wants to put together a bid. Now, this is a highly profitable company, so how do you make this financially viable?
I think you can't make as much money as you do with the engagement-based business model, which is why no one wants to change it, because everyone makes so much money from it. But just because people make a lot of money from horrible toxic things, whether it's forever chemicals or sexual trafficking, we just shouldn't allow that. And so I don't think we should wait for, is there another as profitable business model? We should just say, what is the good for society that is sustainable for society, and make that happen. And I think what Project Liberty is doing with the decentralized social protocol and how data can be differently controlled there is one aspect. Subscription is another aspect. You could imagine in the future, once governments actually recognize that technology is part of constituting the social fabric, that the design choices that are made in that digital public infrastructure, you can imagine markets or X prizes for different ways of designing that infrastructure that are actually experimenting with different things that are pro-democracy, pro-children's development, and that funds are actually going into that because it's actually considered to be public infrastructure, just like parks.
Yeah, I would just add, I think philanthropic support to get some alternate platforms started and growing. And then ultimately, I mean, imagine if, I don't know, could it be done for $20 a year? If you had to pay $20 a year to be on a platform where you're not being sexploited, you're not being, attacked by Russian bots or whatever. No offense to Russians here, but yeah. So I mean, there must be models. Right, you'll never make a lot of money on it, but as a sort of a public-private venture, there must be alternatives to what we have now.
And again, I think the standard alternative to an extraction model is a subscription model. Okay, and so part of the problem is that we don't have a subscription model. People are not used to having to pay for these services. They take them for granted. They don't realize that, of course, the profit being made is at their expense. And so I actually question, and we're doing a lot of work at the Institute, the Project Liberty Institute, on what we call a fair data economy, and imagining, like, is it that there's less profit to be made, or is it the profit is shared actually a little bit across a broader set of people?
So if you imagine a real creator economy where content is generating actually like a Substack model, where you're actually generating as a content creator, some portion of that revenue is coming to you. It's not that the overall pie is necessarily smaller, it's that it's being distributed in a different way, which frankly is more equitable and more just, I would argue. So I think those remain to be seen. Now I agree with Tristan, generally speaking, like there really is not a better business in the world than exploitation. It's a pretty damn, profitable business. So when you think about sharing those proceeds and being less exploitative, you're going to necessarily shrink it to some extent. But I'm not sure that the delta is as big as people think. It's just the delta is very big for some people, and those are folks who are very, very motivated to not change the models.
Hi, I'm David Newman, the director of the MIT Media Lab, so thank you to the panel. I have a couple quick comments, and then I'll finish with a question if we have time. So just to the last discussion, again, what if we get it right? I'm an advisor to Project Liberty and Frank, and so alternative platforms. We are trying to, I'm a technologist, and we have to, sooner than later, we're trying to design, and we're focusing on kids, new social platforms for kids, new platforms, new protocols, security, privacy. You need to own your data. And you can decide what to do with it. But, it's really, again, we mentioned internet version 1, right? We got it right. So Web 3, we just have to flip the model. We have to flip the model. And how much, to the last question, how much money is enough? It's back to what Sheila said. You can spread it out. It can be equitable. And guess what? There's money to be made. That's not my business. I'm an academic. So just for the education, I wanted to mention quickly, creativity we haven't talked about much. So I just really wanted to talk about our kids and creativity. And so what if you're a parent and your kid's phone only had incredible apps on it? Go Octo Studio is one, it's about creativity and community. That's our technology. So, Octo Studio, so kids can create, they can build community. This is all very possible. You just have to give them the right tools. Scratch for little older kids, it's the largest community coding. It's not like the technologist. We have to help solve this problem because we help create it. So, send your kids and young adults and college kids to the right places. So the question I have for you is, why can't we build the right alliances? Because I can give you 100 really great educational creative apps, and I think the society just doesn't know about them. So we're not doing our job there. So that's kind of the question is, what's the right alliance to get the great technology in the hands of all learners and to shut it off at 9 p.m.
I could say quickly that one of the things that brought me to Mama was that over the last 20 years, I saw that there were so many people trying to do this differently. There were so many digital wellness educators. There were so many psychologists waving their arms, and people weren't paying attention to them. So the question I was asking is, how do you create a movement and sort of, for lack of a better word, brand it in a way that would have wide appeal, right? So I don't think the problem is that, technology isn't inherently bad, but it's how many hours a day are we using it and allowing our kids to use it. John writes so beautifully about the displacement of these real life experiences. And I think that's really the question, and that's what Human Change is asking. Margarita articulated that so perfectly before. What future do we want? Do we want a future where kids are spending 9+ hours a day and most of their experience is mediated through a screen? Or do we want tech to be a part of their life, not the central part of their life?
I would just add, so in the anxious generation, I propose 4 norms. No smartphone before high school, or age 14, I should say. No social media till 16. Phone-free schools, and far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. If we can get large numbers of families doing that, now you're still going to have a lot of kids saying, "Mom, I'm bored. What do I do?" And if they, that's right, it is, yeah. So there are still going to be computers around them. And there's still going to be television sets. Television is not nearly as bad as a smartphone. But if you say, okay, well, you can go on Scratch for an hour a day, so I think as long as these predatory vampire companies are sucking out all their attention, then there's no hope that they're going to do this in large numbers. But if we can stop that, if we can do the 4 norms, now there's room in the day and in the attention for some time on these digital communities.
Maybe, unfortunately, not exactly. I would say for the, age, as you said, maybe 14, 16, digital, it's for me, it's not only social media. It's a gadget per se. And I can share you my personal experience. I have daughters, twins, and not they are different, and one of them probably has a little more emotions. They were 12 months old, and as usually as parents, I was doing some photos, and one of them wanted to see this photo, and I showed her this photo, and she wanted to see the second one. And very quickly, 1 week, I was giving her once a day, maybe just to, and she was doing already with her finger like that, and we were all very excited. Oh, Jenny, 12 months, and she's doing the photos like that. After 1 week, she was hooked. She didn't want to sleep, she didn't want to eat, she wanted to watch these photos. She was 12 months old. She didn't understand, I think, even exactly what it is in these pictures, but just the colors inside of the smartphone, the excitement of just moving a finger like that and something happened was completely, the other one was not like that. And now in Switzerland, I speak with a woman, she has a clinic in the mountains for the children from 2 years old, hooked, they cannot eat without something moving in the front of the eyes. And I would say this is why even when we hear from tech industry about amazing creativity apps for our children, with some age, I don't know, maybe earliest 12, I would recommend them sometimes. But before, even if they're bored, they have to look for something real, like we did, and we found it. It is so easy. We have to remember that we all like very much easy solution, parents and children. And this is why I think kind of this a very nice, I'm many times on tech industry forums, when I listen about all these educational programs where the knowledge will flow to the brain of our children by themselves, and it will be always funny, and the children will be so happy. So from this digital education, they don't need any efforts. Everything is so easy in digital world. And I think this is just too dangerous for me even to risk for a child to have this fun experience in digital world and then compare it always to the real world.
I would like to, we're about out of time. I'd like to ask you each for a final optimistic, brief thoughts to close. While you're thinking of that, I will mention that in 2 minutes there will be a reception here. Please feel free to stay to enjoy a drink and a bite, and you'll have the opportunity to talk with the panelists some more. Final optimistic thought?
Just to say briefly that I agree with what Margarita said, that we actually have to pay attention at a deeper level to the design. Marshall McLuhan said in the 1960s, the medium is the message. I know that Julie is a acolyte also, as I am, of Neil Postman. How many people here know the book Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman? Honestly, we are all just recapitulating what Neil Postman said in 1982, and basically it was all right. And what he talked about is affordances. How does the technology, the word affordance, invites us to use it in a certain way? I would say touchscreens have this problem of creating this very rapid response with the colors and the immediacy of touch for young children is actually going to be, I think that we're going to look back and say that was a bad idea. I think that computers, where there's a little bit more mediation, is better, but at a certain age. So just to say, on the optimistic note, I think that the whole thing is really, really clear to the world. I think that there can be an alliance of the organizations and philanthropists in this room who want to make this happen. I think that we've made the big tobacco moment happen. We've had the Rachel Carson moment. We have the parents' movement of moms. We are very, very close. We just need to actually keep it going. So just to say, we can make something happen.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly completely agree with that. I mean, I think that's exactly why I joined the Project Liberty team after being, in the orbit of Project Liberty for so many years. Is exactly that. We're in a true crisis moment, and it's a global crisis moment. But the awareness is high, and so the conversation is turning to solutioning, which I think is right. And there are solutions to this, and some of them go all the way back to the origins of the internet. The origin story of the internet is not one of disharmony. It's not one of abuse. It actually isn't. It's a story that's much more about fostering connection. And so I think if we keep that as a North Star and we look at solutions like the one Project Liberty is developing, but other solutions that exist as well, and we're in partnership together with those principles as our North Star, I think we're going to get there. I feel very optimistic about it, actually. It takes a real crisis, I think, unfortunately, and we've seen that, right, to get us through it. But here we are.
When we talk about the effects of technology on democracy, I'm not optimistic, and Tristan and I have talked a lot about this together. But when I look at at technology on children, I'm wildly optimistic, because this is not a social change project like any other. This is not one where you have to deploy resources and persuade people and make little gains here and there, and it takes 10 years. This is nothing like that. This is like, bad metaphor for Americans right now, but this is much more like you drop a match and a wildfire goes. That's what's happened. A wildfire is going around the world. And so I'm wildly optimistic that on at least the kids' issues, things are going to change faster than you can even imagine.
So I want to bookend Tristan's comment. I think Amusing Ourselves to Death was Neil Postman's most well-known book. Pink Floyd made an album, but one of his most important books, I think, was The Disappearance of Childhood. And he explains how technology and media, in part by exposing children to things that are not conducive to childhood, really makes childhood go away, because childhood is an invention that humans created. It wasn't always there. We used to treat our offspring like adults. So childhood's one of our best inventions. And what I feel very positive about is that I know that we will win, because when it comes to our children, mothers, fathers, parents, there is nothing we won't do. And so parents are rising up. It's not just me, it's not just John, it's not just Tristan, it's not all the people you see here. There are parents everywhere in every community who are standing up now and saying enough is enough. So you will see the pressure coming on the lawmakers, on these companies, and we will not stop until things change.
I can say something optimistic as well. I also teach a class of 19-year-olds, and we ask them to take away their phone for a day and then write about that experience. And at the end of that day, a half of them say, I wish my parents did not give in to me when I was 12, and they did not give me a phone back then. So I have hope for this generation that they will learn from their mistakes, and the next generation may be better off. Please stay for some face-to-face interaction with others for the next hour. Thanks to all of you, and thanks so much to the panelists.